far into our first session of the day, which is going to be on surviving a gap year.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for turning out this morning. Thank you, Colleen, for showing up to present at 10 a.m. and look as lovely as you do.
Thank you.
I have the pleasure to introduce Colleen Bannock. She's going to be speaking about surviving a gap year and successfully and with good humor surviving a gap year. She has been with the Steuben Prevention Coalition since 2018 as a staff member. She was a member starting in 2016. Her background is working as an executive assistant to the CEO and CFO of a local hospital, as well as a 20-year background as a community relations coordinator for a local former congressman in New York State Senate. So with that, I will turn it over to Colleen. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kelly. Let me go ahead and share the screen now. Okay, there we go. Well, thank you, Kelly, again. And as Kelly said, I am Colleen Bannock, and I am the prevention coordinator for the Steuben Prevention Coalition. I first wanted to give you a little bit of information about our community and the history of our coalition. Steuben County is an agricultural county in upstate Western New York with a population of over 97,000, and it is actually larger than the state of Rhode Island at 1,390 square miles, and we are located right in the heart of the Finger Lakes region. The Steuben Prevention Coalition serves the entire geographic of Steuben County and has 13 individual school districts. So our coalition was first formed in 1991. The group identified needs and assessments through the community and applied for a DFC Mentee Mentor Grant in the spring of 2009. And they were granted that in October of 2009. They applied for their first 5-year DFC grant in the spring of 2012 and were not successful. They applied again in spring of 2013 and were awarded their first 5-year DFC grant in 2013. We came upon our year 6 DFC grant application in 2018 and were denied. This is why we are here today, and we're going to talk about surviving a gap year. We are successful survivors. It took a lot of work. So hopefully you can get some good takeaways out of this. For the 2018-2019 Drug-Free Communities Grant application for our year 6, we were denied. And this was a serious wake-up call, not only to myself, but to our entire coalition. On August 29th, we received a notice of non-award. And I was currently attending the coalition's Week 3 Academy. And all members of that particular class were awarded their grants and were celebrating. So this was not a fun time for me. So I went back home after the academy, collected myself, had a few chats with some of our leaders of the coalition, and we began to calm down and begin to assess where we were at and what we needed to do. So with that, we began to look at what we had already done. Just as a precaution, we began in early January of 2018 after some discussions are, what if? What if we don't receive this award? Everybody was absolutely positive that was not going to happen. But we did begin the process. We began to foster a relationship with the Steuben County Legislature, which we had already made several informative presentations to them. And then in early August, prior to going to the academy, we made a presentation of the what ifs to them, and also made the same presentation to our fiscal agent, which is Catholic Charities of Steuben, and told our story and what would happen should we not receive the funding. Everybody was still pretty sure that this was not going to happen, and that this was a preventative measure, and thank God that we did that. We then began the call to action. Fortunately, our next full coalition meeting was within the next week, so we put the word out with the call to action. We gathered them immediately. We began to issue press releases on the situation and began to create additional awareness. Through this entire process, we began to realize that there was still a large amount of our community that did not know who we were or what we actually did, and that was kind of a shock to us. We also began to identify our needs and the urgency of those needs due to the fact that our funding was going to cease within the next 30 days. So we focused on also the value of the coalition and the losses to the community. We outlined our successes and our accomplishments, and we also outlined the losses to the communities and to our local school districts. Following this initial meeting, from this meeting, we established a sustainability work group of our most influential members and partners. We took the time to seriously take a look at our finances and realized that because of having to spend down your monies at the end of your grant cycle, we were going to need monies to get us through October through December of that particular budget year. And then we began to identify the needs for 2019. We developed a bare bones contingency budget. We identified some outside funding sources. We prepared formal requests for both the Steuben County Legislature and our Catholic Charities of Steuben fiscal agent. And we prepared a list of outreach funding requests for the community and involved our schools and community groups that we currently had partnerships with. Our fiscal agent stepped up to the plate. We were very thankful for that and covered our costs through December of 2019 without question. With the remaining grant funds, we purchased and spent down on all things allowable through DFC regulations to assist us in getting through the next year. We purchased everything that we could, increased supplies and increased and things like that to try so that we would not have to purchase those again during our gap year. We proposed a contingency budget to the county and our fiscal agent in the form of a formal request to both agencies, and out of that they both made recommendations. Their recommendations came back less than the contingency budget that we had proposed. So we went back to our work group and came back with a new budget that came within their recommendations. So then we needed to step up our coalition member fundraising and outreach to get as much money as we could. And then again, we applied for the 2019-2020 cycle of the DFC Communities Grant. We then went back to the media and continued to tell our story to raise awareness and push our data out to the community. Like I said earlier, it became very apparent that a lot of people, a large base of the population, didn't know who we were outside of the groups that were involved in our coalition and the school districts. So we began radio and television and news outlets. We increased our social media. We didn't increase our newsletters. Obviously, we do those once a month. But we increased the amount of information and data that we were pushing out, including those in our newsletters. We increased the amount of data presentations we were doing to community groups such as Rotary and Kiwanis and the Elks Club, such as that. And we began to let them know what the current data and drug trends were throughout all of that. By telling our story and increasing awareness, we were able to access additional community support outlets. We were able to become engaged with agencies that had community funding lists. Our local colleges stepped up to the plate with in-kind services, such as printing needs, advertising needs, and using their email blast list to get our information out as well. The business districts, we had quite a few of them step up with in-kind needs as well, also providing printing needs, and some of their budgets also allowed us to get some additional materials made for some projects that were in the works but wouldn't be funded. So there were several additional grant resources for emergency funding, and with the loss of our DFC grant, we qualified for several of those. So I would stay on the lookout if something should happen for these emergency funding grants, because they're very useful. We did several small asks for our community partnerships, and most of them were solicited, and then some just showed up in the mail, which was very enlightening to us. And now we foster community relationships with those particular groups as well. And then we ask our school districts to step up and make small asks, or if there was anything allowable in their budget, even small. And we would, at this point, we're willing to accept anything, what those are. We continue to stress the need for the things that would be lost to the communities and the school districts if we were unable to continue, such as our surveys and data collection. The largest one being the Prevention Needs Assessment Survey. The schools use this data to identify the needs of their particular schools and form their action plans. But this data also aids our school districts in additional grant applications. And it's important to remind them of that because this data typically is not collected anywhere else except through our efforts in the coalition. So there were 1, 2, 3, 4. There's at least 5 outlets of data collection that would be lost to the community and the school districts. Our loss is continued through trainings that we provide, the alcohol and beverage sale establishments, which I'm sure everybody is aware of, called the TIPS program, the DITEP program, training to educational professionals, that would be lost. And we typically train anywhere from 25 to 35 people a year on the DITEP through our school systems. And we also, while not involving the New York State Police in our condensed training, we provide condensed training to targeted county agencies. And that would have been lost as well. Also, any training opportunities to our members, volunteers, and community. Additional losses to the community would have been all of the educational awareness and things that our prevention educators go into the schools and provide, things that we provide to the community through tabling events and health fairs, etc. It's important to make the community aware of what the coalition does and how it relates. All of these things relate to them. Community service to the students is a big issue. We do provide a lot of community service hours to our 13 school districts, and they would have lost that. So that piqued their interest in helping us a great deal. All of these relationships are key to your sustainability, creating, building, maintaining, and the biggest thing that you always hear in all of these presentations is the WIFM factor, the what's in it for me. Our takeaway from this experience was make sure you create these relationships before you're in crisis mode. Build on them and listen to them, even if it does not fit within your DFC grant targeted areas. If you can do things for them, even if it doesn't fit in your target area, they're more likely to assist you when it doesn't fit into their targeted area, should you need them. You maintain them by keeping them informed on what you're doing and on a regular basis, not asking to be in front of them to give them updates on what you're doing, your successes, your progresses, even if you're not going to make an ask of them. And then again, provide them with the WIFM. Usually the biggest WIFM is public recognition And we found that to be hugely successful. They just want the phone calls, the personal letters. They like to be recognized in the media with media attention. They were very thrilled to have their announcements and faces put on our social media as people that were willing to assist us, not only in this crisis, but in other times. We gathered quite a few new additional coalition members and partnerships through this, and putting them in your newsletters, just creating recognition for them. That usually is what they want the most. Due to our efforts to build and maintain these key relationships, a big WIFM for both Catholic Charities of Steuben and the county was the formation of our opioid task force, as this was a hot topic for them while not being a targeted substance under our DFC grant. These agencies, after we received our 2019-2020 Year 6 grant award, they actually financed us again specifically for opioid abuse focus. This allowed us to hire additional staff specifically devoted to the opioid crisis, and while that was a WIFM for them, it was also a WIFM for us. This person also assists in many of the targeted grant substance work that we do, and created a lot more community awareness and got our name out there, as opioid is the national crisis that everybody's interested in right now. So we did revisit, like I said, our fiscal agent and the Steuben County Legislature, and formed that additional committee and had funding to do that. Until COVID, we were under the impression that we would be considered as a yearly line item in the county's budget. Not the same assurance through Catholic Charities of Steuben, but with COVID, everything is up in the air right now due to budget issues and things that are happening at this point. But it has been a great partnership, and we will continue with that, even if funding is not allowed to continue through them. So I guess I went through that pretty fast. If anybody has any questions, I know I had an hour, but wow.
This is Kelly. Colleen, talk a little bit more about how you had a county legislator on your coalition and how you had brought her to the table prior to this happening.
Yes, probably 3 years ago now, we did have conversations with a particular county legislator, and she agreed to join the coalition. She became very involved in first the marijuana task force, and now is the co-chair of the opioid committee that was formed. We have several legislators that are partners on this. And when we were going through marijuana legalization issues in the county itself, she was very active in assisting the coalition and getting before some of our town boards and whatnot to create resolutions not to pass legalization of recreational marijuana. And with that, we had an additional legislator contact us and want to sit down with us personally and discuss more things about what the coalition does. He has not become a member, but he has become a strong advocate for us out in the community, and actually invites us to his own town hall meetings. He gives up his time to allow us to go to the towns that he represents in the county and speak about what we do.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Hilda was a strong advocate for, and a realist in terms of getting funding from the county.
Yes.
Brainstorming other areas.
Yes. And several county department heads are currently on our coalition and also advocated for us when we were making this appeal to the county for funding during our gap year. So it did feel like an easy process, but I would say the easy process was fostered by the relationship we had started back in the beginning of the year that we lost our funding. And then the fact that we had gone to them with an ask, not a full proposal, but an ask prior to the award notification and denial, about what would happen if we didn't, and this is what we would be asking for should we not receive the grant. So that paved the way, and I think that was very important. Had we waited, I'm not sure we'd have had the support that we had.
Yeah, we had a question from Caitlin too in the chat. She had the question, what was the key factor in getting the schools on board to supporting you during that gap year? She's like, we have a very small, poor school, and getting them on board seems daunting at times.
It does seem daunting. Out of the 13, we probably have 6 of them that are on board pretty much no matter what we ask. We also have, of the 13, we have 4 school superintendents who are on our coalition and steering committee. While they don't attend full coalition meetings on a regular basis, they do attend our steering committee meetings, and they go back to the superintendent's meetings when we are either in crisis or really have a specific ask that we need the schools to step up for, and they make their ask at the school superintendent meetings. And also we have our chairman of the steering committee is a school superintendent right in the town we are located in, and he will do email blasts. So while I think the loss of data to them, the potential loss of data to them was a factor, I think the biggest factor is that we have a number of school representation on our coalition, and that they are able to go out and make those asks on a more personal level.
Awesome. I actually have a question for you, Colleen. So thinking about the whole process, the gap year in itself, it sucks that you guys had to go through that, but I guess what is the biggest takeaway or positive that came out of that for you guys that you may not have realized had you not gone through this gap year?
Oh, I don't know that. Well, maybe it is a positive. Like I said, one of the big things that we realized is that there was still a large number of the community that did not know who we were or what we did. So that caused us to focus on upping our game in the community, in the schools, what we were doing, how we were getting it out there. And another takeaway that we had was that you have to work at it continuously and don't wait until it's a crisis or a necessity. It should be the number one priority, sustainability, even while you're in your 5-year grant cycle. And don't wait till that last year of the 5-year. Start working on it right away. The what ifs and how are we going to maintain should we not get the next year's grant cycle.
So what has the process been like transitioning from that, sort of that all hands on deck and we're kind of restricted and there's a focus on, this opioid project, to having a larger scope now where you have the resources to focus, on alcohol and on marijuana when you had your resources more closely directed you towards opiates?
With the fact that we had taken our spend down, and we had done this prior to the notice of award, just in the what if conversations, we had, instead of focusing our spend down on projects, we focused our spend down on getting additional materials, additional brochures, additional giveaways, prepaying our memberships. I'm trying to think of everything that we did. We did as much as we could with what was left of the money to cover us for the following year. It was almost like nobody was willing to admit that it was going to happen, but there was a feeling that it could happen. And I'm glad that we had those conversations and we did what we did. For the gap year, the money wasn't specifically for opioids. The money that came from the county and our fiscal agent was to maintain the coalition. So we didn't focus totally on opioids during that year. However, when we went back and revisited the county and our fiscal agent for money even after we received year 6 funding, we made that our focus because that was a WIFM for them. They wanted, while we couldn't identify opioids in our DFC funding because the youth numbers just weren't there for that targeted substance, we indicated to those 2 other agencies that would be a focus, and we didn't have the restrictions of age limits and And so that money in this particular year is specific for opioid use, but it wasn't during our gap year.
So what was the most stressful part of all of this for you, aside from not having a job?
Yeah. Well, that stress only lasted a couple of weeks. I think I felt the most stress during the academy, when I hadn't taken the time to realize what we had already done. And we didn't have that concrete plan in order. So coming back, putting out the call to the entire coalition and the press releases, we did bring a lot more of our coalition members back to the table who had not been coming on a regular basis. And it felt like everybody came together and stepped right up. It maybe was, let's see, we got the award. It was in November. So there was about 2 months that it felt pretty stressful. Right away, Catholic Charities said, yes, the money's there, no problem. But it took a budget approval process through the county in order to get the larger portion of the money. So I'd say it was about waiting for that yes to make sure that, yeah, my job was secure and that we could continue with at least the smaller projects that we had planned. And then with putting out the press releases and whatnot, the smaller agencies or funding sources like the Elks Club and the Rotary, they knew what we were facing. So it seemed like an easier ask and an easier yes from them. My stress, I think, was maybe about a couple months. And then after that, we felt good.
So for those that are maybe currently in a gap year, maybe even facing one, what is your number one best advice you would say moving forward and how to not get stuck in a rut and not feel the coalition just completely let go?
Oh, best advice. Yeah, without a tragedy happening in your community, it's hard to keep them focused on it. If you're doing your prevention needs assessment survey, I would just continue to force those data points home, and that it's, even though they're small numbers, it's still, if they are small numbers, it's still happening and things still need to be addressed. Right now, I think the fact that we are pushing out our data and awareness to as many agencies as we possibly can is a good thing and helping us and keeps the awareness. Some of our schools were very shocked at the numbers that their kids were reporting. And just last week, I did a presentation to a Rotary group, and they all acted very shocked at the numbers that were coming through. So push your data out there, keep the awareness of what you're doing and what the issues are, and perhaps put out a question to the communities, maybe a community needs assessment type of thing. What do they feel the issues are?